The storm had rolled in without warning, turning the Los Angeles skyline into a blur of glass and silver haze. Inside a small corner cafe tucked between towering office blocks, Sophia Rivers sat motionless, her fingers curled tightly around a porcelain mug she hadn't touched in an hour. The smell of roasted coffee drifted through the air, mixing with the earthy scent of wet pavement seeping through the half-open window beside her. On the table lay a thin white envelope, the kind that carried both answers and heartbreak. Its contents, a medical report from a fertility clinic in Santa Monica, were printed in sterile black ink, yet they had shattered every color in her world. She had read the words so many times that they were etched into her soul. Severe endometriosis. Extensive scarring. Less than 5% chance of conception. Each phrase had landed like a stone, crushing another piece of the future she had spent her entire life dreaming about. Sophia had always believed that motherhood wasn't just something she wanted. It was who she was meant to be. From the time she was 10 years old, she had helped raise her younger siblings, soothing their nightmares, bandaging scraped knees, braiding her sister's hair before school. Where other girls had dreamed of fame or fortune, Sophia had dreamed of laughter echoing through hallways, of tiny hands gripping hers, of bedtime stories whispered under soft lamplight. Now, at 29, that dream had been pronounced impossible, and the man she had imagined sharing it with had walked away. James Mitchell had been her anchor for 6 years, the steady, kind teacher who had promised her forever. When she had told him about the diagnosis, he had held her, whispered that it didn't change how he felt, and promised that they'd find another way. But words, Sophia had learned, were fragile things. Within weeks, his voice had grown distant, his eyes filled with guilt instead of love. He wanted children of his own blood, he had said finally, his voice cracking under the weight of honesty. He hadn't meant to hurt her. He simply couldn't let go of the dream that she could no longer give him. That night, as he packed the last of his things, Sophia had stood at the window watching the rain, realizing that some storms didn't wash pain away. They only made it clearer. For months afterward, she had gone through her days like a ghost in a city that never stopped moving. Her job as one of Los Angeles's most sought-after wedding planners became both her refuge and her punishment. Every weekend she built fairy tales for other people, white roses, glittering lights, trembling vows, while silently dismantling her own. Her clients adored her because she cared too much, because she still believed in love even when her heart no longer did. Only her assistant Monica knew that the smile Sophia wore like armor was cracking underneath. At night, when the city's hum faded, she would open her laptop and search endlessly for miracles, medical trials, holistic cures, stories of women who had defied the odds. She devoured every post, every rumor of hope until exhaustion blurred the words. It was during one of those sleepless searches that she stumbled upon a name she hadn't heard in years. Damian Cross. He was the type of man whose reputation filled boardrooms and headlines, a self-made billionaire who had built an empire on sustainable energy innovations. But what caught her attention wasn't his fortune. It was his silence. After a devastating car accident that had claimed his wife and unborn daughter nearly a decade earlier, Damian had vanished from public life, emerging only to sign billion-dollar deals or make anonymous donations to children's hospitals. He had once been called the man who wanted to save the world but couldn't save himself. Sophia read every article she could find, piecing together fragments of a man the world admired but no one truly knew. The more she learned, the more an impossible idea began to form. A reckless, desperate thought that refused to leave her. She didn't want his money or fame. She wanted a chance, one last fragile chance, to create life, to experience the miracle she'd been denied. She knew it was absurd, unthinkable, and yet, in her loneliness, it felt like destiny knocking in the strangest way. She spent 2 weeks preparing, studying his schedule, his causes, the circles he moved in. When she discovered he would attend the upcoming Green Future Foundation Gala, a high-profile charity event hosted at the Grand Californian Hotel, she knew it was her only opportunity. She had designed weddings for people who belonged to that world. She could blend in long enough to meet him. She called in a favor, offering to help with the event decor in exchange for an invitation. When the acceptance arrived, she stared at the email for several minutes, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The night before the gala, Sophia stood before her mirror. The emerald dress she had bought, draped across her body like a promise. It was elegant but not extravagant, a reflection of who she used to be, confident, hopeful, alive. Her reflection looked back at her with weary eyes but an unbroken spirit. "You have nothing left to lose," she told herself. She wasn't chasing a man. She was chasing a dream that had refused to die, even when everything else had. The next evening, the hotel ballroom shimmered like a palace of light. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow across marble floors, polished enough to mirror the stars. The air hummed with polite laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses and the low murmur of wealth discussing philanthropy. Sophia stepped inside, the soft rustle of her gown drawing a few admiring glances, but she barely noticed. Her pulse thundered as her eyes searched the crowd, and then she saw him. Damien Cross stood alone near the tall glass windows overlooking the rain-soaked city, his posture perfectly straight, his expression distant. The world might have labeled him powerful, but in that moment Sophia saw something else entirely. A man surrounded by people yet utterly alone. The gray at his temples gave him an air of quiet dignity, but it was his eyes, deep, unreadable, shadowed by old pain, that held her still. She hesitated, every instinct screaming that she didn't belong here. What was she going to say? How could she possibly explain the madness of her request without sounding delusional? But before doubt could paralyze her, she remembered the doctor's words, James's goodbye, and the years she had spent helping others find happiness while denying her own. Taking a slow breath, she crossed the ballroom. The music, the chatter, the glittering lights, they all faded until there was only the echo of her heels and the man who had unknowingly become her last hope. Damien noticed her before she reached him. His gaze lifted, calm but guarded, as if weighing the intention of everyone who approached him. "Mr. Cross?" she said softly, her voice steadier than she felt. He turned fully toward her, his expression polite but detached. "Yes, I'm Sophia Rivers. I helped design this event. I just wanted to thank you for supporting the foundation." His eyes softened slightly, though his tone remained formal. "You're the planner? They did an excellent job." "Thank you," she managed, forcing a smile. There was a pause, the kind that stretched too long and begged to be filled. She could feel her heart racing, the words she had rehearsed for days trembling at the edge of her tongue. But looking at him now, she realized how fragile he was beneath the suit and title. This wasn't a man who would respond to desperation. He needed honesty. "There's something I'd like to talk to you about," she said, her voice barely above the music. "Not business. Something personal." He studied her for a long moment, curiosity flickering behind the wall of control he kept so carefully built. Finally, he gestured toward a quieter corner near the balcony doors. "5 minutes," he said simply. Outside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of rain and jasmine from the hotel gardens below. The city lights spread out like a sea of broken diamonds beneath them. Sophia took a deep breath, feeling the enormity of what she was about to do settle on her shoulders. "Mr. Cross," she began, "I know you don't know me, and what I'm going to say might sound impossible, but please hear me out. I'm not here for money or favors. I'm here because I've lost something I can't live without. Hope." He said nothing, only watched her, his expression unreadable. "I can't have children," she continued, her voice trembling but strong. "The doctors told me my chances are almost zero. I've spent months trying to accept that, but I can't. It's the one dream I've had my whole life. And when I read about you, about what you've done for so many, I thought maybe you'd understand what it means to lose a family before you even have one." Damien's eyes flickered with something she couldn't name. Pain, recognition, perhaps even anger. But he didn't interrupt. "I don't expect you to help me. I just needed to say this out loud to someone who might understand loss without judgment." She swallowed hard, feeling tears sting her eyes. "You've turned your grief into something that helps the world. I want to do that too. I just don't know how yet." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain had begun again, soft and rhythmic against the glass, a quiet applause for their shared silence. Finally, Damien exhaled, the sound heavy and human. "You're the first person in a long time who's spoken to me without asking for anything," he said quietly. "That's rare." Sophia shook her head gently. "Maybe that's because I've already lost everything worth asking for." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. It wasn't pity, but recognition, like two souls who had both been touched by the same storm. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "hope isn't gone, it just hides until someone reminds you where to look." Sophia smiled faintly, unsure if she'd imagined the warmth in his voice. She didn't know what this moment meant or where it would lead, only that for the first time in months her heart wasn't numb. As she turned to leave, Damien spoke again. "Miss Rivers, would you join me for coffee sometime? I'd like to know more about how you turn pain into beauty." Her breath caught. "I'd like that," she said softly. Inside the ballroom, laughter swelled as a new song began. But on that quiet balcony, beneath a city washed clean by rain, two broken hearts had unknowingly taken their first step toward healing, and a story neither could have foreseen had just begun. The following morning, Sophia awoke to a strange feeling, not peace exactly, but a faint stirring beneath the ashes of despair. The night at the gala replayed in her mind like fragments from a dream she wasn't sure had really happened. Damien Cross, the man whose life had been dissected by newspapers, whose tragedy had been immortalized in glossy magazine spreads, had looked at her not as a stranger, but as someone who might understand. He had invited her for coffee. It wasn't a promise, not even a beginning, yet to Sophia, it felt like the world had shifted slightly on its axis. Her apartment looked different in the morning light, less like a cage, more like a space waiting for something new. The framed photos of weddings she had planned still lined the shelves, reminders of other people's happiness, but for the first time in months, she didn't resent them. She made coffee, sat by the window and stared at the rain streaking down the glass. Every drop reminded her of his voice, low and steady, like the sound of thunder before a storm breaks. "Hope isn't gone," he had said. "It just hides until someone reminds you where to look." For the next 2 days she waited, checking her phone more than she cared to admit. Logic told her that a man like Damien Cross didn't follow through on casual invitations. He was probably halfway across the world by now, attending meetings, closing deals, saving oceans. But on the third evening, as she was finishing up at her office, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Sophia Rivers, this is Damien Cross. Are you free for coffee tomorrow at 9 a.m.? I know a quiet place where we can talk." Her heart skipped. It wasn't the kind of message that made promises, but it carried something rarer: sincerity. She replied with a simple yes, then spent the rest of the night oscillating between excitement and fear. What was she doing? This man was beyond her world, and she had approached him not as an equal but as a desperate woman clinging to a last fragment of hope. Yet something inside her whispered that maybe fate didn't care about logic. The next morning dawned crisp and golden after weeks of relentless rain. The cafe he had chosen was far from the glittering avenues of downtown, a small ivy-covered place on the outskirts of Pasadena, where the air smelled of roasted beans and eucalyptus trees. When she arrived, Damien was already there, seated by the window, dressed in a simple charcoal sweater instead of the tailored suits that made him look untouchable. He rose when she approached, and the gesture, old-fashioned, almost tender, eased the tension in her chest. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, offering a faint smile. "I wasn't sure you'd remember," she replied. "I rarely forget people who speak to me without wanting something in return." There was no bitterness in his tone, just quiet truth. They sat across from each other, and for a moment neither spoke. It wasn't awkward, just still, like two notes waiting for harmony. Sophia studied him in the soft light. There were faint lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been visible at the gala, the kind that came not from age but from too much silence. They talked at first about safe things: travel, work, the chaotic beauty of Los Angeles. But as the coffee cooled and the world outside faded into background noise, their conversation deepened. Damien spoke of his late wife, Rebecca, not with bitterness but with reverence. He told Sophia about how Rebecca had been the kind of woman who could make a home out of any place, who had believed in laughter, in charity, in the sanctity of ordinary moments. The accident that took her and their unborn child had not just destroyed his happiness, it had hollowed out his purpose. "I stopped believing in beginnings after that," he admitted quietly, staring into his untouched coffee. "Work became my way of not remembering. Success is a good anesthetic, until it isn't." Sophia listened, her heart aching not just for him but for the reflection of herself in his words. I know what that feels like, she said softly. When something you thought defined your future gets taken away, and all you can do is keep breathing because you don't know what else to do. He looked up then, and their eyes met. Two people suspended in the same quiet understanding of loss. There was no pity in his gaze, no attempt to fix her pain, just recognition. And for Sophia, that was more healing than any comfort offered in sympathy. As the morning stretched into afternoon, they walked through the nearby park, leaves crunching beneath their feet, the sun slipping lazily through the trees. Damien was different here, less guarded, his humor dry but gentle. She made him laugh once, a sound so rare that even he seemed surprised by it. "You're not what I expected," he said at one point, hands in his pockets. "Disappointed?" she teased. "Quite the opposite," he replied. "You remind me that there's still light in people who have every reason to hide in the dark." His words lingered long after they parted. That night, Sophia lay awake replaying every moment. The cadence of his voice, the sincerity in his eyes, the way he had spoken about loss without drowning in it. For the first time, she wondered if the purpose of meeting him had never been about what she could ask of him, but what she could learn from him. How to live again. Days turned into weeks. Their coffee meetings became routine, sometimes mornings, sometimes late evenings after his board meetings ended. They never discussed the night at the gala, or the impossible idea that had driven Sophia to approach him. It felt sacred, unspoken, replaced by something gentler, a friendship that grew from shared silence and unforced understanding. One evening, as the winter wind swept through the city, they met again, this time at his private greenhouse on the outskirts of Beverly Hills. It was a glass structure filled with rare plants and flowers, living testaments to growth despite confinement. Sophia stood surrounded by the scent of jasmine and rainwater, feeling as though she had stepped into another world. "Rebecca loved this place," Damien said, adjusting one of the lamps. "She said growing something was like whispering to hope. I kept it alive for her, even when I couldn't keep myself alive." Sophia touched one of the leaves gently, her fingers trembling. "You didn't just keep it alive, Damien. You made it thrive. Maybe that's what healing looks like. Not forgetting, but creating something that reminds you why you still care." He turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "And what about you, Sophia? What keeps you caring?" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I think it's the idea that love doesn't have to die just because life doesn't turn out the way we wanted. Maybe it just changes shape, becomes compassion, purpose, courage. I still want to be a mother. I still want to create life. But maybe that's not just about having a child. Maybe it's about giving something beautiful to the world, no matter how small." For a long time he said nothing, but the air between them thickened with meaning. Then he took a slow step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You remind me of someone I used to be before I stopped believing in miracles." Sophia met his gaze steadily. "Then maybe it's time to believe again." Outside, thunder rumbled distantly, but inside the greenhouse the air was warm and alive. Something had shifted between them, subtle, unspoken, yet powerful. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was recognition. The fragile beginning of trust, the first hint of possibility. Later that night, as Damien watched Sophia's car disappear down the rain-damp road, he stood alone in the quiet greenhouse and realized he couldn't remember the last time someone had left him. Feeling less empty, she had walked into his solitude like a breath of spring after a decade of winter. And for Sophia, driving home through the sleeping city, her hands trembled not with fear but with something close to wonder. For months she had begged the universe for a miracle, and now, though she couldn't name it, she felt it stirring in the air. Something being reborn in two hearts that had almost given up. The days that followed their meeting in the greenhouse unfolded like a slow sunrise after years of night. There was no declaration, no confession, no promises between Sophia and Damien. Yet something wordless and undeniable had begun to bloom. It wasn't romance in the simple, cinematic sense of the word. It was something deeper, quieter, the kind of bond that forms between two souls who have both walked through the same fire and somehow still found the courage to look at the stars. Sophia began to notice subtle changes in her days. She smiled more often at work, her laughter no longer forced. The color seemed to return to the world around her. the golden light spilling through her office windows, the scent of fresh roses at the wedding she planned, even the sound of rain against her windshield. Damien had unknowingly become her mirror, reflecting back the strength she thought she had lost. Their friendship had become a lifeline, a place where pain wasn't something to hide but something to understand. Damien, too, was changing, though he didn't see it at first. For years he had lived his life with precision: work, meetings, deadlines, philanthropy. Everything measured, everything controlled. But since Sophia had stepped into his world, that structure had begun to loosen. She challenged him without meaning to. Her quiet optimism made him question his cynicism. Her warmth thawed the cold armor he had built around his heart. Where he once saw loss as the end of everything, he began to wonder if it could also be the beginning of something else. One evening, they met again, not in a cafe or at one of his foundation's events, but at the children's hospital where Damien frequently donated. Sophia had volunteered to help plan a small celebration for the long-term patients, a project close to her heart. When he arrived, she was kneeling beside a little girl who had lost her hair to chemotherapy, helping her tie a pink ribbon around a teddy bear. The sight stopped him in his tracks. There was something almost luminous about Sophia in that moment. The way she knelt to the child's level, the gentleness in her voice, the unguarded joy that lit her face. "You're good with them," he said when she finally noticed him standing by the doorway. Sophia smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Children understand love better than adults. They don't need reasons to give it," he nodded slowly. "Rebecca used to say that." Sophia hesitated, then stepped closer. "You still love her, don't you?" Damien looked away for a moment, his expression distant. "Love doesn't end just because someone is gone. It just changes its shape. For a long time, I thought holding on to her memory meant keeping my heart closed to everything else. But maybe she'd hate that. Maybe she'd want me to live." "She would," Sophia said gently, "because love isn't meant to imprison you. It's meant to free you." For the first time, Damien didn't deflect or retreat. He simply nodded, the truth of her words settling into him like a seed taking root. That night after the event, he stood by the hospital's rooftop garden, watching the city lights flicker like constellations in the fog. Sophia joined him quietly, her coat pulled close against the wind. "You look like you're somewhere far away," she said softly. "Maybe I am," he replied. "I've spent years chasing the idea of fixing the world, and now I'm realizing I never tried to fix myself." Sophia turned toward him, her gaze steady. "Maybe you were never broken, Damien. Maybe you were just waiting for someone to remind you how to feel again." He met her eyes, and in that shared silence, something unspoken passed between them. Not the beginning of romance, but the rebirth of belief. It was the kind of moment that didn't need touch or words, only presence. In the weeks that followed, they continued to meet often, sometimes at his company's design labs where Sophia marveled at the technology he was developing, sometimes at her office where Damien helped sponsor community wedding projects for underprivileged couples. Their worlds, once miles apart, began to intertwine naturally, like rivers converging into the same sea. People started to notice. Monica, her assistant, teased Sophia about her mysterious philanthropist friend, and Damien's board members remarked on his newfound patience and calmness. Neither of them confirmed or denied anything. What they shared existed beyond labels. But as life began to show them light again, fate tested the strength of what they were building. One afternoon during a routine checkup, Sophia's doctor delivered unexpected news. Her recent lifestyle changes, better nutrition, reduced stress, emotional stability, had slightly improved her condition. The chances of natural conception were still low, but higher than before. It was a fragile glimmer, but it ignited something inside her. Hope, dangerous, beautiful hope, began to whisper again. That night she sat alone on her balcony, the city glittering below her. She thought of Damien, of his quiet strength, of the way he listened, of how he saw her not as broken but as whole. For weeks she had buried her old dream, convinced it was selfish, naive. But now, faced with even the faintest possibility, it returned with an intensity she couldn't ignore. She wanted to be a mother. She wanted to create life. Yet she also wanted to honor the woman she had become, stronger, wiser, more grounded. When she saw Damien the next day, she told him everything. She expected him to dismiss it, to remind her of logic and statistics, but instead, he simply listened. "Sophia," he said after a long silence, "when you first told me your story, I thought you were chasing an illusion, but now I see it differently. You're not asking life to give you what you lost. You're asking it to let you try again. There's courage in that." His words broke something open inside her, the wall of quiet resignation she had built to protect herself. Tears welled in her eyes, and before she could stop them, they fell. Damien reached across the table and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "You've taught me that hope isn't weakness," he said softly. "It's defiance, maybe. Maybe it's time I started hoping again, too." Sophia looked at him through her tears, her voice barely a whisper. "Then let's both hope, even if it scares us." That evening, as they walked through the city park where the jacaranda trees were beginning to bloom, Sophia realized that she wasn't afraid anymore. The world hadn't changed, but she had. She no longer defined her worth by what she had lost or what her body could not give. She was learning to measure it by what she could offer: compassion, kindness, faith. And as Damien walked beside her, his hand brushing hers every so often as though drawn by instinct, she saw in him not the untouchable CEO the world revered, but a man who had learned slowly and painfully how to open his heart again. Later that night, Damien stood alone in his penthouse, staring at the photo of Rebecca that still sat on his desk. For the first time in years, he didn't feel guilt when he smiled at it. "You were right," he whispered to the empty room.
"Love never dies.
It just finds new ways to live." Somewhere across the city, Sophia whispered something similar to herself, a promise not of love or certainty, but of courage. The rain began to fall again, soft and steady, washing the streets clean. It was as if the world itself was exhaling, preparing for what would come next. Because what neither of them yet knew was that their story, born from grief and desperation, was about to turn into something neither had dared imagine: a journey not just toward healing, but toward miracles. The weeks that followed were like the delicate pause between heartbeats, a calm that felt too fragile to last. Sophia and Damien had found a rhythm that neither of them had planned, a quiet companionship that filled the empty corners of their lives. It wasn't love declared in words or gestures, but something far subtler. A shared breath, a glance that lingered a little too long, a silence that spoke more than conversation ever could. Yet beneath that stillness, something unspoken trembled, the knowledge that both of them had built their peace on fragile foundations, and the world had a way of shaking anything that dared to feel whole again. Sophia's work began to flourish. Her small wedding planning business was suddenly in high demand after her latest project, a community event sponsored by Damien's foundation, went viral on social media for its heartfelt simplicity and emotional storytelling. She had designed a wedding for a young nurse and a firefighter who had postponed their ceremony for years because of financial struggles. The story had touched millions, and for the first time, Sophia wasn't known just as a wedding planner. She was recognized as a creator of moments that reminded people why love mattered. But as success returned, so did the shadows of doubt. Her growing association with Damien Cross attracted curiosity, and with curiosity came judgment. The media began speculating about their connection, painting her as the mysterious woman who had captured the reclusive billionaire's attention. The gossip spread quickly, turning what had been a quiet, private friendship into public fascination. Photographers appeared outside her office. Reporters camped near Damien's headquarters. At first, Sophia laughed it off, but the whispers began to sting. People questioning her motives, reducing her strength and sincerity to opportunism. One morning, as she entered her office, Monica met her at the door, holding a tablet with a hesitant expression. "You need to see this," she said softly. The headline on the screen made Sophia's stomach twist. "Widowed CEO finds solace in struggling wedding planner, charity or romance." The article was filled with invasive details, twisting her life into a story she didn't recognize. Every sentence made her feel smaller, exposed. She closed the tablet slowly, her hands trembling. "They make it sound like I planned all this," she whispered. Monica placed a comforting hand on her arm. "People will always talk, Sophia, but the ones who matter know who you are." That night, she met Damien at his office to discuss an upcoming charity event, but he noticed her quietness immediately. "Something's wrong," he said gently, his gaze steady. She hesitated, then handed him her phone with the article pulled up. His expression darkened as he read. "They always need a story," he muttered. "They can't imagine two people finding peace without assuming it's scandal." "I can handle people talking about me," Sophia said softly. "But I don't want this to hurt you. You've worked so hard to build your reputation." He looked up sharply. "You think I care what they say? After everything I've lost, public opinion is the least of my concerns. What matters to me is truth, and the people who live it." His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed something deeper. Anger, yes, but also protectiveness. "I won't let them reduce you to a headline," he said firmly. "You've given more light to my life than they'll ever understand." Sophia's throat tightened. "Damien, please, I don't want you to fight the world for me." He shook his head slightly. "I'm not fighting the world. I'm standing beside you." For a moment, the air between them felt electric, full of everything they hadn't yet said aloud. But before either could speak again, Damien's assistant entered, announcing an urgent call from the board. The moment broke like glass, leaving a sharp silence behind. That night, Sophia drove home through the rain, her heart caught between gratitude and fear. She wanted to believe that they were strong enough to withstand the scrutiny, but part of her knew how fragile happiness could be when tested by the world. The following week, things grew more complicated. A major investor in Damien's company, an influential figure named Harold Wexler, called an emergency meeting to address concerns about the CEO's personal distractions. The boardroom was tense, filled with men and women who measured worth in numbers, not emotions. "Damien," Wexler began, his tone polished but cold, "you've done incredible work for this company. But lately there's been talk. Your association with Miss Rivers has drawn attention that doesn't reflect well on the company. Investors are nervous." Damien leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Are they nervous about my performance or about the fact that I've started living again?" "This isn't about personal matters," Wexler said sharply. "It's about optics. We can't afford a distraction, not when the world is watching our expansion project." Damien's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Miss Rivers is not a distraction. She's a reminder that this company was built on human values, not just profit. If anyone sees that as weakness, then perhaps they've forgotten why we exist." The room fell silent. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Wexler cleared his throat and said, "Just be cautious. The world isn't kind to those who wear their hearts on their sleeves." After the meeting, Damien stood by his office window, staring out at the city below. He had faced far worse than gossip, but something about this felt different, as if the universe was testing whether he truly believed in the hope Sophia had reignited within him. He thought of her strength, her quiet defiance in the face of pain, and realized he wouldn't, let the noise of the world drown out what they were becoming. That evening, he called her. When she answered, her voice was tired but soft. "I didn't expect to hear from you tonight," she said. "I needed to," he replied. "They're talking, Sophia. The investors, the media, everyone. But I don't care. What I do care about is you, and I need to know if you're strong enough to keep walking beside me, even when the world tries to push us apart." Sophia closed her eyes, tears burning behind them. "Damien, I've already walked through hell. A few words from strangers won't make me stop now." For the first time in years, Damien felt something close to peace. "Then let them talk," he said quietly. "We'll answer them by living." In the weeks that followed, the storm around them intensified, but so did their bond. Sophia continued her work, refusing to let gossip define her. Damien focused on expanding his foundation's projects, publicly dedicating one to empowering women in business, a quiet tribute to Sophia's strength. Together they became symbols of resilience, though neither sought the spotlight. But just as the noise began to fade, life dealt them another test, one far more personal than public opinion. One afternoon, Sophia fainted at work. The world went black before she even hit the floor. When she woke in the hospital hours later, the sterile white ceiling blurred into focus, and she saw Damien sitting beside her, his expression carved from worry and relief. "You scared me," he said softly, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for hers. She tried to smile. "I guess my body decided it needed a break." The doctor entered then, a kind woman with gentle eyes, and held a clipboard close to her chest. "Miss Rivers," she said carefully, "we ran some tests. You're dehydrated and exhausted, but there's something else you need to know." Sophia's breath caught. "What is it?" The doctor hesitated, then smiled faintly. "You're pregnant." For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Sophia stared at her, unable to process the words. "That's not possible," she whispered. "It can't be. I was told—" "I know," the doctor said kindly. "But sometimes the body surprises us. It seems life found a way." Tears filled Sophia's eyes as her hands flew to her mouth. The impossible had happened. The dream she had buried under years of grief and science had quietly bloomed in defiance of everything. Damien's hand tightened around hers, his eyes shining with a mixture of disbelief and awe. "Sophia," he whispered, his voice breaking, "you did it. You brought life where the world said there couldn't be any." And for the first time in her life, Sophia didn't question whether she deserved it. She simply wept, not from sorrow or fear, but from the overwhelming beauty of grace. Outside, the evening sky began to clear, the rain parting to reveal a stretch of golden light. The storm that had tested them had not destroyed them. It had revealed what was unbreakable: faith, love, and the miracle that comes when two wounded hearts choose to believe again. For days after hearing the news, Sophia lived in a haze of disbelief that felt almost holy. Every morning she woke with the same instinctive fear that it had all been a dream, that the fragile thread of hope would dissolve back into the emptiness it had once come from. But each time she placed a trembling hand over her abdomen and felt the stillness there, not yet life she could sense, but the promise of it. The tears would rise again, soft and uncontrollable. She had spent so many years carrying the weight of impossibility that she didn't yet know how to stand beneath the weight of a miracle. The world outside continued as it always did: deadlines, clients, headlines, but within her, time had slowed to the steady pulse of something sacred being rewritten. Damien was her constant through it all. From the moment the doctor had spoken those words, he had been by her side, neither overjoyed in a way that felt intrusive nor distant in fear. He was simply there, solid, present, unwavering. It astonished her how easily he stepped into a rhythm of care without needing labels or definitions. He attended appointments with her, listened carefully as the doctors explained every detail, asked questions she hadn't even thought to ask. He didn't treat her as fragile. He treated her as brave. It was in that quiet balance that their relationship began to shift from companionship into something neither had dared to name. There were no grand declarations, only small acts that spoke of something real. His hand reaching for hers during a difficult scan, her voice steadying his when memories of loss threatened to resurface, their laughter breaking the heaviness of uncertainty. Still, not everyone saw the beauty in what was unfolding. When the news of her pregnancy inevitably leaked, the public fascination returned with a vengeance. Rumors swirled like wildfire. Who was the father? How had this happened? Was it science? Was it scandal? The same tabloids that once dismissed Sophia as a passing distraction now spun elaborate stories that invaded her privacy and tested her resolve. Yet this time she refused to let the noise in. She had already survived heartbreak, humiliation, and hopelessness. Gossip was nothing compared to the storms she had weathered before. Damien, however, took it personally. One afternoon she found him pacing his office, his usual calm replaced by frustration. "They're dissecting your life," he said sharply, "turning something pure into a circus." Sophia walked up to him, took his hand, and whispered, "Let them talk, Damien. They talked when I was broken. They talk now that I'm healing. The only difference is that now I don't need their permission to be happy." Her words stopped him cold. For a moment, the fury in his eyes softened into something far deeper. Pride, admiration, and love he no longer tried to hide. He kissed her forehead, not as a confession but as a vow, that whatever came, they would face it together. The months passed with a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Sophia's body changed, and with it, so did her understanding of strength. Every flutter she felt was a reminder that her pain had not been wasted. It had been the soil from which something new had grown. Damien, too, was transforming. The man who once lived in the shadows of grief now found himself painting a nursery wall in shades of sunrise, laughing when paint streaked his shirt. He attended prenatal classes awkwardly at first, surrounded by expectant couples who whispered when they recognized him. but his discomfort dissolved every time Sophia smiled. To the world, he was still the billionaire visionary who had conquered industries. To her, he was simply a man learning how to believe again. One evening, near the end of her second trimester, they took a drive along the coast. The sun hung low, staining the ocean in hues of gold and rose. Sophia rested her head against the car window, feeling the baby's faint movements as the waves crashed below. "Do you ever think Rebecca would approve of this?" she asked quietly. Damien was silent for a long moment before answering, his voice low and thoughtful. "I used to think she'd want me to hold on to her forever. But now I realize she'd want me to keep living. Love doesn't compete, Sophia. It evolves. What I had with her taught me how to build a life. What I have with you teaches me how to live it." She turned toward him, eyes glistening in the dying light. "And this child," she whispered, "will teach us both how to dream again." They drove the rest of the way in silence, each lost in thoughts that felt larger than words. Thoughts of destiny, of grace, of how sometimes the universe waits until you've lost everything before giving you back what truly matters. The birth came on a night thick with rain. Fitting, Sophia thought, since rain had always been the backdrop to every turning point in her life. The labor was long, exhausting, and raw. Damien stayed beside her through every contraction, gripping her hand until his knuckles went white, whispering words of courage when she thought she had none left. And when at last the cry filled the room, that sharp, trembling sound that split the silence between life and death, everything else fell away. The nurses placed the tiny bundle in her arms, and for a moment, Sophia forgot how to breathe. The child's eyes were closed, her skin soft as sunlight, and her heartbeat strong against Sophia's chest. Damien leaned over them, his expression breaking into tears he didn't try to hide. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's proof," Sophia corrected softly. "Proof that miracles exist." They named her Hope, not because it was poetic, but because it was the truest word either of them had ever known. In the weeks that followed, their home filled with quiet laughter, sleepless nights, and the music of new beginnings. Damien learned how to hold a bottle awkwardly, how to change diapers with the precision of an engineer, how to sway a crying infant to sleep in the early hours of morning. Sophia, meanwhile, discovered a peace she hadn't known since childhood, a sense of purpose that went beyond her career or her past pain. Every time she looked at Hope, she saw the sum of everything she and Damien had endured. Love resurrected from grief, dreams reborn from ashes, courage shaped by loss. In time, the world's noise faded. The media lost interest, the whispers died out, and what remained was the quiet dignity of two people who had chosen to write their own ending. Sophia's story became an inspiration to others, not as a tale of wealth or romance, but as a testament to resilience. She began speaking at women's health conferences, advocating for awareness around endometriosis and infertility, reminding others that a diagnosis is not a destiny. Damien expanded his foundation to include programs supporting single mothers and families affected by medical loss. Together, they built something greater than themselves, a legacy of hope that reached far beyond their own miracle. Years later, on a warm spring afternoon, Sophia sat in the garden while little Hope ran barefoot through the grass, her laughter ringing like bells. Damien watched from the porch, his once cold eyes now soft with contentment. Sophia turned toward him, her heart swelling with quiet gratitude. "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been if we hadn't found each other?" she asked. Damien smiled faintly. "Every day, and every day I thank fate that we did." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining easily, like two rivers that had finally met after a long, winding journey. As the sun dipped behind the horizon and the first stars began to appear, Sophia whispered to herself, not in prayer, but in awe, "I asked the universe for a miracle, and it gave me life instead." Damien heard her and drew her close. "No," he said softly, his voice warm against her hair. "It gave you the strength to create one." The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine across the garden, the same fragrance that had surrounded them on the night they first met. Time had moved forward. Seasons had changed, but the essence of that moment remained. Two broken hearts learning to beat again, not in spite of the storms they had endured, but because of them. And somewhere in the distance, as their daughter's laughter echoed into the twilight, Sophia realized that the story she had once thought ended in despair had merely been waiting for its true beginning. She had believed herself barren, forgotten, unworthy of joy. But life, unpredictable, wild, miraculous life, had rewritten her truth. She had not been cursed with emptiness. She had been chosen to understand fullness in its purest form. Hope had come to her not as a miracle she demanded, but as the miracle she had become. And in that quiet realization, beneath the painted sky of another Los Angeles evening, Sophia Rivers finally understood the meaning of grace. It was not in getting everything you prayed for, but in learning that even heartbreak can become holy when it leads you home.